Our presentation is called I Think I Can, I Think I Can, Building Student Motivation by Promoting Incremental Mindsets. We are William Fine, Kristen Haynes, Ellie McCarthy, Sam Naab, and Colleen O'Leary. We want to start with 4 quotes that we've heard in our classrooms this past year. The first one is, I hated learning this at first, but after I practiced it a lot, I found that it's actually pretty fun and I'm pretty good at it. I'm never going to learn this. Trying is pointless. School is just not my thing. Come on, guys, we just need to push through and learn this. We just need to work hard. These are 4 quotes that we've heard in our classrooms that explain different types of motivation that we've seen from our students. We wanted to focus on these types of motivations and get students to put forth effort in our classrooms and get students to high levels of motivation. We want to do this by exploring the what, why, and how of motivation in our project. The what are the theories that influence student motivation. The why is why should you as educators care about incremental theories of intelligence? And how can you develop incremental theories of intelligence in your own classroom? First, we'll focus on the what. These are the implicit theories of intelligence and motivation. There are 2 major theories of intelligence, and they are entity theory of intelligence and incremental theory of intelligence. The first one is the entity theory, which has individuals believe that intelligence is fixed. Students will accept struggle and not really do anything about it. This is commonly referred to as a fixed mindset. And students believe that success is based more on genetics. The other theory that we want to focus on in our project is the incremental theory of intelligence. This is where individuals believe that intelligence is malleable and can change and is capable of being developed over time. Students are found to be more likely to seek help in the face of struggle. It is commonly referred to as growth mindset, and this is where effort really matters.
Now that we've discussed the implicit theories that students in our classroom hold, we're going to discuss why specifically educators should care about incremental theories of intelligence. The implicit theories that our students hold have many impacts in the classroom. We've discussed how they relate to motivation, where teaching an incremental theory of intelligence was successful in enhancing students' motivation. This study was done specifically in a mathematics classroom. More generally, implicit theories of education have been linked to academic resilience. When faced with setbacks, incremental theorists are much more likely to persevere and maintain confidence in their own abilities. Additionally, students with an incremental theory were more likely to take a remedial course when they initially did not achieve success. On the other hand, entity theorists were more likely to attribute setbacks and failure to their own personal intelligence and were less likely to remediate. Specifically with grades, incremental theories were positively correlated to higher grades in 2 subjects, writing and mathematics, and these studies show further applications for other subjects as well. Students come into our classroom holding goal orientations along with their implicit theories, and these 2 are related. Entity theorists often hold performance goals. These goals are more attributed with success and failure, and this can promote a fear of failure in our students. On the other hand, incremental theorists are more likely to adopt a mastery goal mindset, where they work to increase their abilities through effort. Sometimes our students come into our classroom with stereotype threats. Students who experience stereotype threat when they were tasked with adopting an incremental theory of intelligence displayed much higher academic achievement and reported enjoying academics much more than when they held an entity theory of intelligence. In the social realm, our students sometimes hold theories about the incremental or entity views of personality, and incremental theories were shown to improve students' resiliency in the face of numerous social stressors, including exclusion and bullying. This can decrease stress in general and correlate positively with academic benefits.
So far in this presentation, we've looked at what theories of intelligence are and why we as educators should focus on implementing and reinforcing an incremental theory of intelligence within our students. The next part of this presentation is going to be focusing on how we as educators can help develop incremental theories of intelligence within our own classrooms. We've identified two major paths forward for educators, specifically focusing on classroom environment interventions and also specific activities which can be used as interventions to reinforce incremental mindsets. Within the realm of classroom environment intervention, we've identified three tools or practices that educators can use and establish. First is focusing on group work and task differentiation. The second is implementing guided inquiry levels approaches to teaching. And third is focusing on specific teacher feedback. Group work and task differentiation. Task differentiation is the process of modifying individual assignments to specific students or select groups of students. A classroom is a dynamic environment, and there is a variety of learners in all settings. Common practices are for teachers to help accommodate those learners by differentiating the tasks they present. One way many educators do this is by assigning group work and basing those groups off of student ability. So higher achieving students are paired together and lower achieving students are paired together. Studies have shown that this pairing, higher achieving students and lower achieving students in specified groups, is not necessarily correlated with either an incremental theory of intelligence or an entity theory of intelligence. However, when tasks are differentiated between the groups, so higher achieving students receive more academically rigorous problems, whereas lower achieving students receive easier problems, that's when correlations, especially with the lower achieving student group, are associated more with an entity theory of intelligence. So this suggests that it's specifically how teachers instruct the groups of students may be more important than the grouping of students themselves. The second suggested practice in a classroom environment intervention would be to implement guided inquiry into a teacher's lessons. So guided inquiry is when students explore their own ideas, they develop explanations through discussion, and they articulate their thinking. All the while, this teacher is there, present in the classroom, answering questions and helping students decipher their strategies. It helps redirect them when they maybe get off the wrong path. So properly scaffolded approaches produce the strongest link with an incremental theory of learning. Studies have found that when guided inquiry approaches were not scaffolded properly, such as the teacher presented a set of problems and told the students to figure it out on their own, students were led to frustration, and they were more commonly associated with developing an entity theory of intelligence rather than an incremental theory. So allowing students to have some autonomy over their work and really get into the nitty-gritty problems has been shown to help promote ideas of efficacy and an incremental theory of intelligence. But when students are left to do that on their own with no scaffolding and no guided instruction through the process, they are more associated with an entity theory of intelligence. Finally, another approach is providing specific feedback. One study we researched focused specifically on either a comfort-oriented feedback approach or a strategy-oriented feedback approach. Focusing on a college calculus class, a professor offered various forms of feedback. All the forms of feedback assured the student that the instructor knew that this student was a strong student. However, the comfort-oriented approach included statements saying, it's just not the case that everyone's a math person, and don't worry about this. You're only going to have to do the easy problems on the test, and you're not going to have to worry this hard. I know you're a good student, but it's going to be okay. Like, don't worry about this. Students who received the comfort-oriented feedback were significantly shown to possess more of an entity theory of intelligence with their math ability, whereas students who received strategy-oriented feedback from the instructor, so also including an assurance that the instructor knew they were a talented student, but also offering support such as consider working with a tutor or changing your study styles. Those students who received that strategy-oriented feedback were associated with holding views of an incremental theory of intelligence for their own math ability. So, teacher feedback is very important in the classroom environment and is just one of the many tools and practices teachers can implement in their own classroom to help reinforce these ideas of an incremental theory of intelligence.
Now that we've talked about some interventions that can be done in the classroom about the classroom environment, now we're going to talk about some activities interventions. The three main ones we're going to talk about today are project-based learning, which is student-centered projects solving meaningful problems that meet the learning standards. Saying is believing, which is when somebody advocates for a theory, they can actually build their own belief in said theory. And the third one is the rough draft talk, which is explicit, non-evaluative approach to classroom discussion. The first one we're going to talk about is project-based learning. By definition, according to Kokatsaki et al., project-based learning is an active student-centered form of instruction which is characterized by students' autonomy, constructive investigations, goal setting, collaboration, communication, and reflection within real-world practices. What this means is that students in the classroom are given large projects that on their surface seem much too difficult for them to solve. However, when these projects are split up into chunks and students are offered incremental ways to learn how to do the projects, the students are able to do them. In other words, the teacher provides scaffolding for students to solve real-world projects that solve meaningful problems in their own communities and in their own schools. An example of project-based learning would be a middle school math class giving their students an opportunity to build a playground. On the surface, this playground seems much too difficult, but when the project is broken up into increments and chunks, the students are able to learn this. And by the end, they're able to see that the more they try and the more effort they put in, and if they stick with the problem, they're able to find a solution. And by solving this problem, they're also able to meet learning goals. In addition to promoting incremental-based learning, project-based learning, as proven by both Cheng and Lee and Latimer and Riordan, increase both student motivation and engagement. So what does project-based learning look like in the classroom? Well, in a math classroom, we already discussed this. Latimer and Riordan brought about this playground idea that a middle school did. In addition, Latimer and Riordan offered some other project-based learning to different classrooms. Potentially, it looks like a film in an English or a theater class. Potentially, in a social studies class, it looks like interviewing local small business owners about policy changes or law changes in their own local communities. In a science classroom, this might look like testing water and looking at the pH to determine how the water pH affects the ecology and the local ecosystem of the water that is being tested. There are some limitations to project-based learning. First of all, the two main studies that we've looked at, Cheng and Lee and Latimer and Riordan, as well as other studies in project-based learning, have been very narrow in their approaches. For example, the Cheng and Lee study was done in a Taiwanese vocational school, and the Latimer and Riordan study was done in a middle school in San Diego, both very specialized groups. In addition, as Latimer and Riordan have noted, if project-based learning has not been done effectively, and the teacher is not properly trained on project-based learning, it can have outcomes that, one, don't meet the students' learning needs and don't meet the learning goals, and two, become disengaging for students.
One specific type of activity that we as teachers can implement in our classroom is based off this idea of the saying is believing effect. Higgins and Rolls researched this effect, and it is shown to have a significant positive correlation with an attitude change in students. What this looks like specifically in relation to incremental theories of intelligence is that when our students are instructed to advocate for incremental theories, they are likely to adopt these theories for themselves. This is particularly effective when students are asked to advocate in their own words. This has numerous applications for many different content areas. In subjects such as English language arts, journal entries are a really positive way to promote this incremental theory of intelligence directly related to content. Almost any content area can do a short journal entry as a do now and ask students to advocate and support incremental theories of intelligence. Specific studies have shown the benefits of letter writing through mentor programs, where older students were asked to write to younger students, encouraging them and describing to them how they can build their intelligence and how success is often motivated by and dependent on effort. These can be adopted again in any discipline, and it could be particularly helpful in STEM, where certain groups of minority students experience stereotype threat and other fears of failure associated with these specific mathematical and engineering content areas. In a subject area such as debate, speech, or again in English language arts, assigned debates where students are asked to advocate for a position regardless of their own implicit theories that they come in with, these activities can help to build the personal implicit theories which align with the position they advocated for. In this case, we would want to be promoting this incremental theory of intelligence. This is a really effective strategy with numerous applications that can be adapted to fit your classroom specifically.
So the last activity implementation that we're going to talk about today is called rough draft talk. So essentially, rough draft talk can be defined as this explicit, non-evaluative discussion. Coming from an ELA teacher's perspective, I think we're much more comfortable and more familiar with this concept of the classroom being a collaborative environment in which students sort of co-create and develop ideas as the lesson progresses. So we might hear from a variety of different voices as they're all trying to work through whatever question or discussion that we're having. In the math and science classroom, this may look a little bit different because discussions are usually oriented between a right answer or a wrong answer. Therefore, students, particularly students in middle and high school, really feel that pressure to perform in front of their classmates. And they feel that pressure to get the answer right. And so many times if they're not confident, they won't take that risk. Rough draft talk really works within this incremental mindset to promote just a wider variety of voices in general. And there are three kind of categories or principles that helps to do so. So the first principle is that rough draft talk fosters a culture supportive of risk-taking. What's crucial when you're kind of initiating rough draft talk is that you really want to tag the conversation as such. Be very clear and explicit with your students that, this part of the discussion, this part of the lesson that we're engaging in is rough draft, right? So what does that look like? Well, we aren't going to evaluate our peers and you aren't going to be evaluated by the teacher on your response. This just being really clear and upfront with students about the expectations for this conversation would help to lower some of those anxieties or fears that the student might feel, therefore increasing their likelihood of taking those risks in conversation. The second principle of rough draft talk is that we're going to promote the belief that learning involves revising understanding. Now, this goes really back to just the idea of what the incremental view of intelligence is. No one comes into a math classroom already knowing this concept. No one comes into an ELA classroom already knowing that concept inherently. But we really want to be explicit in helping kids to understand that their learning does need to revise their understanding over time. So some quick examples specific to the math classroom. This might look like students paired up together and they have a sheet protector over a piece of paper that has the problems on it. And they might be working through those problems using a dry erase marker rather than a pen or a pencil. Using this non-permanent surface really highlights the idea that over the course of this lesson, their answer is going to change, right? So they enter into this mindset, into this framework, knowing that they're going to have to revise their answer already. Another example may be students, if we're starting a new problem on the board, the teacher puts the problem on the board and students all have a dry erase board. And so they're all going to work through the problem in different ways. They might use different operations at first, and they're going to put up those boards, and you can kind of see a gauge of the room, do a quick formative assessment from a teacher's perspective, but also you're able to engage students and kind of ask them, oh, I see you approach the problem this way, or you approach the problem this way, right? Let's put that in dialogue. What was our thought process there? Sort of building those metacognition kind of tools and skills as well as you go along. The final principle of rough draft talk is that it raises the student's status by expanding on what counts as a valuable contribution. As stated, oftentimes in classrooms, students feel this pressure to really get the right answer. In a specifically rough draft context, answers that are getting us to someplace closer are going to be valuable inherently. Right? Just because they're not the final answer doesn't mean that they're not a good answer or a valuable answer. So in doing so, we really meet that final aim of getting a wider range of contributions. It's going to involve more students, more diverse students, in contrast to the same 3 kids that are going to raise their hand and answer it correctly every single time. So where do we go from here? The first thing that we want to kind of summarize our entire presentation is by saying that this presentation needs to be used in your classroom, in your context, by you. You are going to be the expert in the room. So maybe for 28s that are watching this, you can already kind of see how you might implement one or more of those activity or environmental interventions in your classroom. Maybe there are some that aren't going to work with your students in your context. We kind of trust that you're going to know and be able to pick and choose sort of what's going to work best for you. With that being said, we do want to be clear that there are limitations to this research, right? This isn't final, this isn't comprehensive by any means. Some specific limitations that we want to point out is that there is demographic variation in the various articles that we've researched. In particular, there's also content area variations. So for example, with the rough draft talk, it has been proven to work in the math classrooms. We can extrapolate on that it might work in a science classroom, but we would really like to see some further research to back up that point. And then in terms of expanding the methodology of such research. So for example, Sam's point, when he was going through and talking about teacher feedback, that was all written feedback in the research. We would really like to see some examples of how verbal feedback might be able to build that incremental view of intelligence as well. And just to summarize in the whole, you will have an impact on the students in your classroom. We want to be clear that this incremental view of intelligence is not limited to students. Teachers also can implement this in their own teaching practice, and we're all learning and we're all growing. So we really hope that you sit with this presentation, that you can hopefully take some practical takeaways back to your classroom and really have that beneficial incremental impact on your students. So thank you for watching, and we look forward to answering any questions that you might have during our Q&A.